have two experts here. One is Paul Rogers, who nothing can compare to his experience, and I've learned that because as I go around, everyone says, "Is Paul Rogers coming?" So apparently, you're the man. But his experience being a firefighter and dealing particularly with safety issues is the key person. And I'm going to also invite up as well Dan Murray. Dan has, I asked them to talk together so that they can, because I've seen them work, and it's, Dan is the one, he's the on-site guy. He knows he's been there, and he works it, and he can talk about the real experience. So between these two exceedingly important individuals, I know we have a lot of firefighters here. These guys were in New York City. They were firefighters, and they realized how important this issue is and is going to be. So they took the next step once they retired and are working on this particularly. So with that, I would like to invite Paul Rogers and Dan Murray to come and present. Don't forget, ask the questions, because the panel is going to come up here, and your questions are going to be asked, so that they have, when they have those questions, hopefully they'll get to that, and there's a whole hour and a half almost of that. So with that, if Dan and Paul would come up, please.
Priya, thank you. I can tell you, if I had a room full of my colleagues in the room and they heard you say that, they would beat the heck out of me. One thing you don't like to do is self-praise, that's for sure. And Rhea, thank you for giving a voice to the fire service, because it's really important to make sure that we keep everyone safe. And during our time with the New York City Fire Department, we've seen a lot of line-of-duty deaths, so we're fully aware of that. So safety in the fire service is extremely important. I'm going to make sure that I have my, okay. So let me start off by telling you, back in 2013, I was actually pulled out of the firehouse which is almost like a punishment. You're pulled out of the firehouse to work on battery energy storage systems coming into New York City. So that's how long we've been working on this. Since 2013, we started looking at this. We understood the need, and there was a great chief of fire prevention at the time, who was a electrical engineer, who said, yeah, we got to figure this out. We got to make this work. And he said, let's start doing some deep R&D, which we dealt with NYSERDA, which was really helpful during that beginning stages. NYSERDA was there for us. We also dealt with the Department of Defense, with NASA. We went down to Washington, D.C. So I do want everyone to know that the amount of R&D that we did before we put pen to paper was almost 5 years of work before we actually did it. We also knew that there were already batteries out there in the landscape in New York City. We had batteries in every single hospital, at every critical infrastructure. We knew it existed. And during my time in the hazardous material unit, I would, once in a while go to an off-gassing lead-acid battery in a hospital or a phone place or something like that. So I knew a little bit about batteries, but we started looking at the lithium ion, all right? So most of the presentation I'm talking today is going to be about lithium ion batteries and how we looked at them. But there are other chemistries that are out there. They just haven't come to maturity yet. And you can see the way the code is written. The code is written based on primarily lithium ion batteries. But there's way added that for other chemistries that are out there. but lithium-ion batteries right now, they are the flavor of the year. And also, when you're writing a code, sometimes you can go too far and have unintended consequences. So there's a balance there. We wanted to make sure, number one, that the community was safe, and number two, we wanted to make sure that the firefighters were safe. So the intent of the code addresses that. It makes sure that we can actually protect the community and protect the people that are actually going if there was an event to take place. And it is a fire prevention code. I never want to say that it's a fire elimination code. It's a fire prevention code. We reduce the risk of, and majorly reduce the risk. And this particular code that we worked on, I've looked at codes for a long time. That's why I was drafted down to headquarters to work on this in our Fire Prevention Bureau. But I've never seen anything so deep on how this code is put in there and the amount of work that goes in there. And I'll talk a little bit about that. And for people in the audience, you have to understand the scale of what was done. And I can tell you we had a tremendous amount of pushback from the manufacturers in the industry on the work that we were doing in New York City, to the point that some of them actually just left and said, we can't do work in New York City. We were leading the efforts around the country, probably around the world. And we're like, okay. And I remember there was a head engineer, and she said to me, she goes, you watch, Paul, they'll be back. And guess what? They came back. They came back. Because we were asking for some pretty high-level stuff that was never seen before anywhere. And sure enough, that wound up getting drafted into the code later on, into the national code, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But the other thing, I do want to take a little bit of a victory lap. New York City has had these things installed since 2018 without one single incident that has taken place in New York City. And it comes down to the people that are reviewing it, and I think David mentioned that, the peer review team, or actually New York City doesn't have a peer review, but they have a unit specifically for battery energy storage system. That's all they do, the sustainability unit. And they know this stuff upside down and backwards. They see it time in and out. And I also go around to other communities that everyone thinks that all the power that's being stored is just for New York City. Well, I can tell you that there's about 40 sites in New York City already, and there's a lot more on the way. So they do have sites inside of New York City, which is a very tight community. But also, besides just looking at these things, there's also oversight. And again, going back to what David put in there before, the state looked at that too. And they said, we got to make sure that we have some good oversight for the life of the systems themselves, right? The standard of care is so important to try to prevent an incident from taking place. And you'll pick up things during an inspection. And then finally, the last thing we looked at when we were doing this was help for the fire service. Again, when I was down there, one of my concerns was, well, these things will not have anyone there for us when we pull up to a scene, whether it's a fire or just even a false alarm or a phone call by someone saying, hey, I thought I saw smoke coming out of it, whether they see it or not. Believe it or not, that happens in the world, in the real world, where people will make these phone calls. Maybe it's 3 o'clock in the morning and it's a drunk they're going by saying, I think I saw smoke coming out. And now we're running around looking for and investigating these things, not knowing what to do. Well, in the situations of the battery energy storage systems, we said we need to get some sort of help because if the enclosure itself, if nothing's coming out of it, we didn't see anything, who can we call to make sure that we actually know that we can leave the scene and this thing won't go on fire when we left? So all of that was baked into the code, and it was transferred into the state code. And it really was a game changer to try to make sure that the people in the fire service understood that the help was there for the fire department, and a lot of help was there for the fire department. So you may have seen this before, and this is really the infrastructure of what's inside of these cabinets. And today I'm, again, speaking primarily about lithium-ion batteries, outdoor cabinetized installations. And the reason that they're cabinetized is because when we did our work with the military, the one thing that they brought up was compartmentation. Compartmentation meaning that we have an individual fire load and it stays within the actual cabinet. And that was big for us. And it was an aha moment, all right, when we were looking at what they did in the submarines. They compartmentalized everything. So if there was an event, it's going to be isolated to that one compartment. And that's fire protection 101. I mean, even if you take a look, you go into a fire, you close the door of a room, and sure enough, you can confine it to that particular room. And again, that was the concept that we started to build on based on that, and there was a lot that went into it. But also, you see this thing that says BOS. The other thing that we started to hone in on, as you can see, for those who haven't seen, these are cells there, right? That's the building block, and then you get into modules, and then you get into unit racks. Each one of these things have their own performance test, which I'll have on the next slide. But they all have a performance test, and they're all listed through a Underwriters Laboratory standard development organization. And that's one of the layers of safety. So you can't use counterfeit batteries. And by the way, I was sitting on the FAA, Department of Transportation, lithium-ion battery safety group, and we knew that there was a lot of counterfeit batteries that were making its way into the United States of America, and we see some of the consumer products that have actually had them in there. That can't happen with the battery energy storage systems. They are totally different than what we see with the consumer products, because I do go to some meetings and everyone's like, well, the e-bikes are going on fire all the time and they have lithium-ion batteries. And they just get into this whole thing that it's all lithium-ion batteries. I'm like, that's not the case. That is not the case at all. So the other thing that in the balance of the system was the battery management system. And that's the eyes and ears and the brains of the actual system itself, always checking to look at the state of health of the battery itself. So we honed in on that. We wanted to know a lot more about the battery management system for that particular point. And most people kind of just shoved us off, like, you don't need to know much about it, it's just collecting data. And we were like, well, maybe we need that data. And that data now has to be available for the fire service. So just to give you a scenario, if there was a fire alarm that went off in the middle of the night, usually it's 3 o'clock in the morning, we show up to the
Yep. No rush to the weary.
That's right. So you show up to this, unoccupied lot, and you don't know what's going on, right? But we can tell through getting in touch with someone, and David touched on this, right? You can get in touch with someone, and they can take a look at the battery management system, and they can take a look at the state of health of the battery. We know it works because it's already happened here in New York City. No fire, but the fire department went there as a result of a fire alarm, a false alarm that went off. They showed up. They made a phone call to the number that was available to them. They looked at the battery management system. They told the incident commander, we don't see anything on our side. We'll continue to monitor it. And they will get them back in service immediately. That's a big deal in the fire service, is to get them back in service because it's all about life safety and making sure that we fill that gap, right? Whenever you have a gap when people are out on false alarms, you have a gap in the life safety from the fire department itself. So the BMS was a big thing, and as I said, that proof of concept is already out there. And again, kudos to NYSERDA by getting that to the Department of State and getting that codified for what was done in the updated codes in the state of New York. So this is just a lot of information here, right? I'm going to boil it down real easy and quickly. If you can see, the code was just updated. David went through some of the recommendations. The big recommendations that I felt, I was in the fire service, was the ones that we put in there to help the fire service. We did understand that a lot of the state of New York has a lot of volunteer fire department. And if there was an event that took place, what we are concerned about is who do they hand it off to after the event is finished? And that's a big deal, right? Do they have to actually stand guard because of concerns of maybe a reignition or something else, or now you have stranded energy there and it's a damaged system? Who's going to come and relieve them? And that, again, was put into the code. That was a big deal. It's a 4-hour response, which some people are like, 4 hours, that's crazy. It's the only place in the nation that has that. I sit on NFPA 55, which is a national code. They don't even have that. The only place in the nation that has a time frame, and 4 hours is the maximum time frame. So you can be there within 30 minutes, an hour, whatever the case may be, but the 4-hour limit. So even my colleagues on NFPA 55 were like, wow, that was a pretty big deal that you got that into the state of New York, or the people, they actually took that into the state of New York. That's leading the country. Trust me, you're going to see other states around the country kind of grabbing that. They really liked what the state of New York had done. So, so getting back to just listings and certifications, UL 9540, basically you got the cell that's got its own listing, you got the module, which is a group of cell that's got its own listing, and then you have the full system itself has its own listing. So all of those things reduce the risk. But the key to validate safety, and this is where we started to do some work in the New York City Fire Department. We were walking around the big high-rises. In the beginning, we were looking at high-rise buildings to put these things in. And we went to a couple of places that had the batteries in there, but we were looking at a different chemistry now, as opposed to lead acid. We're looking at lithium ion. So we said, you know what? We want you to burn a couple of these cells, and we wanted to take that data, and then we wanted to use that data to start looking at fire protections that we needed. And then we weren't getting the same results on the cells themselves. So if you can't repeat the test, it's not repeatable, then it's almost not validated. So we said, all right, go to the module. Same thing applied. Then we said, burn your whole system. Take that big container and burn it. And they would look at us like we were crazy. And guess what? That is now what the NFPA 855 uses. That's what the state uses. So going back to, if I can go back, see that big system right there? Going back to that, the state of New York has adopted this testing methodology. If this thing were to go on fire, the whole reason that we do that is to make sure that it doesn't leave the box. It stays within it. It's called a cabinet, but it doesn't leave that. That's a big deal. So, and it's a $1 million test for people to do this. So the state of New York has adopted that, and that's called large-scale fire testing. And that, again, validates that if this thing were to go on fire, it stays within there. Now, Danny is going to speak a little bit about what took place up in Warwick, and I think some people are aware of what took place up in Warwick just recently around December. But again, he'll integrate the large-scale fire testing in that particular one there. So these are just some of the recommendations that we had. I think David went over them, and I'm going to just go over that. The BMS, these things are being monitored at remote operating centers. We've called them on a couple of occasions. We actually can take a look. Some of the work that we do in New York City, we actually look at the battery management system every single day for the state of health. And if there is an event that takes place, immediately we look, we see on our screen, we don't see anything here, we wind up calling up the manufacturers. In this case, one of the incidents that took place was Tesla. We called them in Texas, like, yeah, we don't see anything on our side. They knew exactly the battery energy storage installation. They knew the address, they knew the coordinates and everything on it. So they are really monitored really, really well at those remote operating centers. And the guy said to me, he's like, well, listen, now we're on a first name basis because they know who we are. We call them, just to check in every so often. But they're like, look, if something took place, we would have called you guys before the alarm would have went off. So basically, they would have been able to get in touch with us to say, hey, something's going on, even though the fire alarm hasn't even been sent out yet. They would have told us that, hey, we shut it down. And shutting it down, you stop the charging and discharging. That's big for a lithium-ion battery. So, just know that those things are out there. There's an immediate reach back for the fire department, that number, that 800 number. There's also the emergency handoff that I kind of went into before. Closed circuit TV, that's a big deal. Even New York City doesn't have that, so maybe we went above and beyond that. All right, but the closed circuit TV is a big deal. You always want to get eyes on it yourself to see what you have going on that end. Fire alarm central monitoring station, just like a building has a fire alarm here, that is now applicable to outdoor battery energy storage systems. The peer review was a big deal, and David, congratulations on that. That was your push, and I totally agree with what you did there. For those people who here are code officials, it's not taking away your authority. It's just there to give you a second set of eyes that you can look at it until the point that you're trained that you may not be able to, you may not use the peer review that's out there. Also, inspections. Inspections are key. Inspections are key to make sure that we have people going out there inspecting. So the third-party inspector comes in, and they have to take a look at these things. And you know what? They need to get that information back to the code official to make sure that they have it, that this thing is compliant to the fire code from the time that it is born to the time that it dies, throughout, from cradle to grave. Site-specific ERPs, this is big for the fire department, and making sure that it's not a boilerplate emergency response plan. These are made for the fire department, that it actually is for each site, has its own site-specific emergency response plan, and they have to be trained on that annually. Annually, we know there is turnover rate, so annually they need to be trained. It's paid for by the developer. The developer pays for that annual training. And I think we went into the peer review. This is, again, a big program. As you can see in there, we have commissioning plans and decommissioning plans. So again, from birth to its grave, from the commissioning to decommission. And then also making sure that, you know, you're working with the local fire marshals on that end. So I want to hand the microphone over to Danny real quick so he can just talk a little bit about the incident. By the way, by show of hands, does anyone know what took place in Warwick in December? Only a couple? Well, maybe we shouldn't say anything. There's only a couple of hands in here. All right, Danny.
Yeah. Thanks, Paul. So I was the chief in charge of hazmat going back to 2019, and this battery issue was sort of just developing in the fire services as a priority for the fire service. How many members of the fire service are here today? All right, it's a good amount. We all know lithium-ion battery fires are a major concern and have started a lot of fires. These batteries, like Paul said, the counterfeits, the poorly made, the damaged and defective bikes, e-bikes and scooters were causing a rash of fires in New York City, really more than anywhere else. A couple other major cities like London and Sydney, and they had similar situations where the delivery workers, and these gave lithium-ion batteries a really bad name. And that's where there were a lot of headlines, fatal fires in New York City. We had multiple fatalities, and it was a big problem for the fire service. And we had to deal with that. And we actually had Paul and ESRG people come in and help us to develop our SOPs on how to handle all those emergencies and fires related to that. To compare those headline fire stories that we saw in the newspapers and on television in New York City all the time, it kind of gave the lithium-ion batteries a bad name. You can't compare the cheap, defective, non-UL listed batteries to what's going in a BESS system. We all have these iPhones in our pockets, and we don't wake up in the morning hoping that it doesn't burst into flames, right? Because we know they're well made, they have a good battery management system, and it's a brand name battery that has a lot to lose by their batteries going into thermal runaway. It's very similar to the BESS systems. So as Paul had mentioned, there's a lot of safety systems put in, but sometimes they're all going to fail and we're going to have a fire. Although rare, it can happen, and in the fire service, we have to be prepared for the worst case scenario. I'm going to speak a little about, there was a recent fire at the end of last year in Warwick, New York, which is in Orange County, it's a suburb of New York City, kind of a small town with a volunteer fire service, and they had the fire in 2023, which is one of those 3 fires that led to the interagency working group that developed this state code. That's when the governor decided, all right, we had 3 fires in 2023, we need a new code. So the same type of batteries, which turned out to be poorly made, the company that made those BESS systems has gone out of business. They had another fire at the end of last year. And Paul asked me to go up and speak to the chief of the Warwick Fire Department and the Orange County Hazmat chief, just to ask them, how did the event go? because we deliver training and we teach these firefighters, firstly, don't enter the fence line, because it's just like a substation, a part of the grid. We don't allow firefighters to enter the substation unless they're with a subject matter expert. We do the same thing here. Also, don't put water on the fire, and I'll explain why. So the Warwick fire came in at around 10:15 p.m. on a Friday night. The fire chief arrived within 4 minutes, and this best container was burning quite merrily. Which for us in the fire service is actually, sometimes we like to see things burning, because now we have a defined operation in front of us rather than trying to figure out where the fire is going to happen. He made the decision because it was raining out, which was probably the cause of this fire, water intrusion, similar to the ones in 2023, to leave his members and apparatus back at the nearby firehouse, because he was trained properly, and he actually had experience because of the 2023 fires, that we don't want to put water on this fire, which is kind of against what we usually do. Fire, we put water on it. End of problem, we go back home. With the batteries, these BEST systems are designed specifically when all the safety systems don't work and there's a fire, to fail in a very specific and safe manner. So this fire in Warwick, we always tell the firefighters, manage the incident, because you don't know what's going to happen. Every fire is a little bit different. He arrived, he knew not to put water on it, and he allowed that BEST system to fail as designed. They require deflagration panels on the roof. So if the gases build up, when a battery goes into thermal runaway, sometimes they off gas without going on fire. If the gases build up and it gets to an explosive atmosphere, the explosion's going to go up and away from those firefighters. And that's based on a fire they had in Arizona. They called for the hazmat team. And why was that? Because batteries are electrochemical storage, and that's why it typically falls under the jurisdiction of the hazmat section of the fire service. So they called the hazmat team. The hazmat team arrived shortly after they were called. This is an old volunteer hazmat team in Orange County, and they set up air monitoring around that area where the fire was, downwind from where the smoke and gases were going. The readings they got were surprisingly, to a lot of people, very low, because we always tell, when we have to speak to the public, they're very concerned about these fires and the toxic chemicals that come off of them. Through a lot of research and a lot of testing that we've done even at ESRG, it's very similar to any house fire or car fire, burning plastics, burning metals, a lot of the same things, refrigerants that you're going to find in most buildings or car fires. Have there been evacuations done at these fires in the past? Yes. That was an abundance of caution. The air monitoring afterwards, post-mortem, determined that they were really not necessary. When we have a house fire, we don't evacuate the adjoining houses unless there's a danger of them catching on fire. Similar here. I'm just going to get into the air monitoring readings, and I should note, by 3 a.m. The next morning, the fire service was relieved from that scene. So they weren't stuck there for days, because they did proper procedure and let those batteries consume themselves. And your problem kind of goes away. If you had put water on it, you're going to have a lot of stranded energy. It's going to burn for a longer time, and the cleanup's going to be a lot messier. So that's why we train the firefighters in that method. I was just going to go over some of the, I didn't get this in time to read it for the PowerPoint, I apologize. Some of the readings that were taken by the Orange County Hazmat team. Carbon, and they had metering set up close to the site downwind, and then further down the site, there was a baseball field, and they left the meters there for 3 days. The highest reading they got of carbon monoxide, which is one of the main gases produced at these fires, was 4 parts per million. That was the peak reading. It was much lower throughout the incident. Your household CO detector that you hope doesn't go off until 9 parts per million. So you can imagine it's a very low amount. You can breathe that all day long pretty much, and you'd be fine. Hydrogen cyanide, another gas that is produced by the combustion of these batteries and that the fire department tests for. We had 1.5 parts per million as a peak. The OSHA short-term exposure limit is 4.7 parts per million. So once again, in a safe range. There was ammonia at 1 part per million, which is well below the short-term exposure limit of 35 parts per million, and some volatile organic compounds that never exceeded 0.3 parts per million. Also chlorine at 0.5 parts per million. So these are very, very low readings. The initial fire in Warwick, do I have time still? I'm waiting for the hook. 1 minute? All right. So the initial fire in Warwick was next to a school. And in New York, upstate, there's usually a lot more room to put these a little more remote from commercial buildings. In New York City, we have them jammed into lots because there's not a lot of space. Next to a school, next to a church, next to residential buildings, wherever we can fit them. And like Paul said, we haven't had an incident. So there was a school next door. They came in after the fire was extinguished, and because it was a school, they swabbed the classroom desks, the outsides of the building, the school bus to determine if there's any contamination, and they got nothing. So I know my time's short, but that was the story with the Warwick fire. We learned a lot, and I do commend how they operated. And you know, when these battery systems go online, as Paul said, there's a mandatory training, which is we do classroom and we discuss everything you ever want to know about batteries and the fire service. And then we walk out to the site and the engineers give us a tour of how these operate. They open the cabinets and all that. So I'll cut it off now, but thank you for your time.